Hi everybody, this is Bobby. I am filming in Audubon Park in New Orleans. It's late September of 2022 and I'm excited to introduce you to the book I just published. I Fought the Devil and the Devil Won. It's a book about the origin of vampires. It delves into Transylvanian mythology. It goes back all the way to around year 1, so ancient mythology and folklore. Then I skip forward to medieval times to about year 1100, and then I skip into more modern times now, basically. The action takes place both in ancient and medieval Transylvania, but also in modern Louisiana here in New Orleans. It looks at all these legends and folklore from Cajun country, just outside New Orleans, but also from my homeland, Transylvania. I am Transylvanian, in case you don't know by now. But my accent is from Transylvania, which is a real place. It's part of Romania nowadays. It's a book about redemption. It's a book about the depths that the human heart can succumb to. It's a book about saving people. It's a book about being the better person, but also about this folklore around vampires. And I want to read you a little excerpt today from chapter 15. I titled this chapter "Joseph Stalin's Uranium Train Has Hauled It Away." For those of you who don't know, I'm a big fan of the late John Prine, the Americana singer, and he has a song called "Paradise" in which he exposes the environmental disaster left by mining in West Virginia and in Kentucky. And he has a line in which he says, Mr. Peabody's train has hauled it away. So I fashioned my title of this chapter from that line in his song. So I called it Joseph Stalin's Uranium Train Has Hauled It Away. This particular chapter is about the environmental disaster left by the Soviet administration in Romania, but also by the native communist Romanian administration back in the 70s and 80s, and about what they did to the people there, the impoverishment that they brought, but also about uranium in general. Now, my book, I Fought the Devil and the Devil Won, has many twists in the plot. I pride myself for being, I don't know, maybe not a masters of twists, but I love twists, let's just say that. I counted 7 twists in the plot of this book, so if you're looking for a book full of surprises, full of the unexpected, this is the book for you to read. You will be very, very surprised. But without further ado, let me read you this little paragraph. Well, it's not a little paragraph. It's 10 pages. I want to read you from this chapter. The action in this particular chapter takes place in a uranium, well, a little town in Transylvania that used to have a uranium mine in real life. It's called Nucet. It's in the heart of Transylvania. So here it is. Nucet, Transylvania, Romania, November 2022. So it takes place a little bit into the future. They walked on the dusty, formerly paved streets of Nucet, streets that no longer had potholes in them, but actual craters. It felt not only like they were all of a sudden stepping back in time, but also like leaving Romania. It felt perhaps a little bit like they were leaving this planet altogether, in a country that the American friends in the group had found to be immaculately clean up to that point. There was little Nucet, a small town, maybe a little town, maybe a large village. Nobody exactly knew, because not even Theodore could make out exactly what it was and what it had been. A strange settlement, still populated, even though the uranium mine had closed down in year 2002. But populated with what? Even Theodore, who was in his native country and spoke these people's language, was aghast at what he was seeing. It was apparent the entire town was unemployed, lethargic about earning a living, and about living a life. in torn, soiled rags. They're all sitting in rotted out, cracking plastic chairs in front of the communist-built 3-floor apartment blocks, staring into the abyss and suffocating in piles upon piles of their own litter. Broken beer bottles and discarded aluminum beer cans, not only on the dirt that once used to be their front lawns, but also on the road and everywhere else. So much litter. It was impossible to drive on these streets unless you begged to get a flat tire just 3 minutes later. The few locals who weren't staring into nothingness were either chewing gum, smacking their lips audibly, or spitting out shells of sunflower seeds at the 6 friends, showing off their rotted out teeth that they still had. If they were looking for a scary town of mutant looking people, they certainly found it here, inbred or not. These people would certainly be great on camera in that chase scene that Adrian had been stressing out so much about. He'd be so proud for his friends for happening upon this town, so happy to be here and to film with them. But yeah, he was in America by now. Well, anyway, the 6 friends were shaking their pants nonetheless, trying everything that they could to avoid eye contact with the few people in town who didn't seem to have their mind wandering off to some distant world, trying to avoid any reason for confrontation with these few locals who were looking straight into their eyes from their cheap white plastic chairs. They didn't even dare make the slightest waving gesture at them, in fear of somehow provoking them. The sheer hatred and hostility in those piercing, steely eyes was truly terrifying. In a country where almost everyone else had been the most hospitable that the American friends could possibly find, well, this seemed like another world altogether. There were no grocery stores in the entire town, and the businesses, well, they were practically gone. No fruit trees in the area, and the fields around the town were bare. Just a few sad, sickly looking trees here and there, and the dark green grass on the outskirts. Grass that was almost black, different looking than the rest of the countryside that they had seen before, which had lush, bright green grass. Maybe it was because of the lingering radiation from the uranium mine that had even the vegetation affected somehow. The trees on the hills outside the town were still had some leaves on them, but they were of a very sickly color. They couldn't exactly pinpoint what it was in that color that made it look sickly, what made it have that appearance, but man, did it look sickly, deadly. The whole town with its people and its defaced, sad communist-era buildings, along with all the vegetation around it, it all looked like it was dying a slow, agonizing death, slow, painful decay, waiting for non-existence, a Transylvanian nirvana. The main street turned 90 degrees to the right, and they turned with it. Right around the corner, they saw a dead horse in the middle of the road, and thousands of flies hovering around it, ever so lightly touching the rotted meat in order to get a little sick nourishment from that exposed, pungently smelling biological dilapidation. The 6 friends could see very clearly the parts of the horse's flesh that had been cut out, showing the off-white ribs of the animal here and there. Not 50 yards away, adults were barbecuing what could only have been the flesh of the horse that they had slaughtered, probably just the previous day. Jenna, Carla, Heidi, and Benedict instantly and involuntarily got a little aftertaste of the lunch they had just had a couple hours before. Carl and Theodore had tougher stomachs. They passed the poor slaughtered horse, or whatever remained of it, and they continued walking, still trying everything that they could to avoid looking too closely at the locals having their late afternoon barbecue feast, and not saying a word to them or to each other for that matter. 3 blocks away, and they finally arrived in front of the building that proclaimed itself to be the city hall. It was also the only building in town that had any cars in front of it. 2 cars. One probably belongs to the mayor, and the other one most likely belongs to his sister, whom he's having unbrotherly fun with in the shower every day. Benedict thought. They all entered the graffiti-covered communist-built edifice in the hope of finding anyone, even remotely official, that they could talk to. Inside the city hall, behind the double doors made out of rotted-out, blackened wood at the entrance, they saw the unkempt security guard, his hairy belly protruding through his greasy, dirty, pale blue police-issued shirt at the bottom, where 3 buttons were missing. The brutish warden started speaking to them in the thickest, most hick country Transylvanian accent that even Theodore had heard in his life, barely intelligible even to himself, who was proud to be a Transylvanian first and a Romanian second. The guard asked the group rudely what they wanted. "Yes," he said, "that bitch mayor," as he called her, "she's inside the office. Does it look busy to y'all blind big city idiots? No, it's not. So yes, you can go in and see her for all I care." Theodore was so embarrassed beyond measure, a relic of the communist golden era Romanian government. Well, just leave him to his devices. Obviously, he's super busy finishing another canned cigarette, Theodore thought. "Do any of you pigs have a cant I could borrow? I'll give it back after I smoke it, I promise. Or a Marlboro? Shit, I'll even take one of the ones we make, you know, the Carpats, with or without a filter. Oh well, since you suckers don't smoke, and all of y'all are mute all of a sudden, get out of my sight and go see the damn mayor. I don't care." Inside the mayor's office, yet another world. The sweet scent of lavender was permeating throughout in sharp contrast to the pungent odor of black mold and rotted wood in the hallway. Colorful flowers on the desk, mahogany furniture, framed family pictures on the wall, and about 200 leather-bound books in the little library on the side of her desk. The mayor was a stylish, well-put-together middle-aged woman with the firmest handshake and the most brilliant pearly whites. It looked like she was ready for the catwalk on some glamorous fashion show in Milan, Paris, or New York. Not there, in that sad building in decrepit Nucet, inhabited by these creepy, barely human things. Her English had only the minutest trace of a Romanian accent. She addressed the group directly in English. To her barely visible disappointment, no, the group of 6 friends in front of her in her office were not from the Canadian Environmental Cleanup Corporation that had been contracted to come over and to clean up the massive uranium waste heap just outside the town. She explained to the small group that the Canadians were supposed to come over and pack the toxic dirt up and ship it all the way to the jungles of the Democratic Republic of Congo. No, neither were the 6 people in her office representatives of the American-based NGO that was supposed to arrive any day now to train these lost souls in town on getting new career skills, since the Romanian government seemed to be completely ignoring them. So the mayor tried her best not to show her how deflated she was when she learned that they were simply in Nucet to film a little documentary as they lied on the spot, and to hear some local folk tales, some mythology. She continued talking to them, if anything, just to break up the monotony of her day. She confessed to them that the only reason she accepted to run for mayor of Nucet, completely unopposed of course, was, well, because the higher-ups in the Romanian government had arranged for her to get a hefty salary for the slightly more dangerous conditions of leading a socially unprivileged town, as the national authorities referred to Nucet, to this little town. She explained that she was making 5 times more money than she used to make in her home city of Oradea, working as the economic liaison to the mayor there. Well, the national government is exasperated by now, to say the least, with Nucet and with all of its former mayors in the past 20 years, she continued. Well, the town lost about 90% of its population since the mine closed down in the early 2000s, and about 2,500 people still refuse to leave their land and their apartments, Even when everyone promises them compensation and much, much nicer apartments and houses elsewhere, they still insist that this is where they were born and this is where they'll die. The mayor continued speaking to her small, astonished audience. She said that the big, nasty waste dump, the slag heap you just saw outside of town, well, that had been growing taller and fatter since the early 1950s. But it stopped growing in 2002 when the mine finally closed down. Yes, it's still there, as you can clearly see, and it's still an environmental disaster. With its radioactive radiation, it contaminates not only the people in town, but also the river cutting through it, the Crișu Negru, a river that could potentially bring cancer to the rest of Bihor County and beyond. It could affect no fewer than 500,000 people, close and far away. Yeah, it's a disaster to happen. She carried on in a humble tone about her past accomplishments, things that were anything but humble or minor in any way. She told them that the national government had picked her for the task of Nucet, not only because they flat out told her that she had poise and polish with being a no-nonsense administrator, but also thanks to her connections that she had made during her studies at the University of Chicago and the London School of Economics. In her previous job in Oradea, they deemed her as a great and tough manager, and she had been able to attract a lot of foreign direct investment there in Oradea. The national government did notice such things and was hoping that maybe she could perform similar miracles here in Little Nucet too. She had major fears that she'd fail this time around actually, but would still do her best to help these locals in any way she could, she said, blushing. Sure, they could all speak to the locals in town if they wanted to, she told them. Encourage them if they could understand a single word that the locals said. No, the people of Nucet wouldn't physically harm them. They were too lethargic to do anything in the first place. They all suffered from obesity, diabetes, thyroid cancer, and a host of all kinds of other cancers. Yes, they looked tough, but they could barely get up from their plastic chairs that they've been sitting in all day, day after day after day. Yes, they looked mean, but they were just lost and disappointed of how life had turned out for them. And the mean looks on their faces came from sadness, she explained. Most of them are really good people, but very, very, very lost souls. When Theodore told her that he knew very little about Nucet, even though he was born and raised in the town of Salonta, only about 100 kilometers away, she asked the group excitedly if she could share a little bit of Nucet's history with them. Wow. She's got to be really bored to be so nice to us complete American strangers, to chat us up like this, Benedict mused to himself. So the mayor proceeded in giving them the full history of the little town that she was in charge of, and she explained that the administration of communist Romania discovered uranium in the area in 1947 and tried their best to keep quiet about it, lest the bigger brother from the east would hear about it. But that big, scary, unfriendly brother did hear about it very quickly, so Joseph Stalin sent Soviet troops to the area in the early 1950s. Troops who came in for a peacekeeping operation. The Russians didn't even bother cutting down the trees. Straight up burned down most of the woods around the area because burning it was way faster to clear the ground. They also forcefully collectivized everyone's land on a radius of about 10 kilometers in the hope of finding the largest concentration of uranium much quicker. And they did find it quickly, within a year. But they also haphazardly founded the great, proud mining city of Nucet on the ashes of the tiny little village that once stood there. For the following 2 decades, the Soviet leaders Stalin, then Khrushchev, continued to pillage the land around Nucet, with the feeble government of communist Romania at the time just standing by and looking at all of it scared from the bleachers. The Russians took all the uranium ore and piled it up into their trains, completely uncovered and completely exposed, leaving radiation and cancer wherever the trains passed through. They hauled it all away to the Soviet Union, leaving Romania without a single ounce of it. All the while, the slag heap outside the sad little town was growing larger and more toxic by the year. When dictator Ceausescu became president of communist Romania in the mid-1960s, she explained, everyone in the little mining town hoped that their lives would dramatically improve now. Although a fierce communist himself, he was also known for being very patriotic and ardently anti-Soviet. The mayor looked at Theodore and simply asked him, "Yes, do you remember?" As if to try to guess his age and whether he was alive when Ceausescu was still the dictator. To which he motioned back that yes, he did remember. And he simply replied, "Yeah, I was born in the early 1980s." So she continued her history by saying that the people in town were severely disappointed with Ceausescu too, because he did nothing to improve their station in life. All he did was divert the precious uranium ore from the communist Soviet trains to the communist trains of the Romanians, of his own corrupt government. He brought more miners from all over the country and built them the apartment blocks that the six friends could see. Apartment blocks that were much smaller, shoddier, uglier, and less comfortable than the ones that the Russian had built in the previous 2 decades. The mayor continued, astounding everybody in her audience of 6. As bad and as destructive as they were, at least the Russians had built apartments that had showers. Well, not Ceausescu though, at least not here in Lucet. So for the next 2.5 decades, he sent miners into that damn mine without proper gear to protect them from the radioactive dust. Not even the most basic masks or gloves. Well, because families lacked showers in these newer apartments, they only bathed in the radiation-contaminated river once every few days. Every evening after their shifts in the uranium mine was over, the men were bringing all that radioactive dust home on their clothes. So it wasn't only the men who started getting cancers left and right, but also their wives, their children. Healthcare in town was, how should I put it? What's the word? Atrocious, even for the low communist standards of the 1970s and 1980s, she continued. Well, by the time Romania became a free market democracy in 1989, it was all too late. The entire town was already dying of cancer. The new authorities slowed down the mining to a halt in the early 1990s and completely closed it down in 2002. Most of the miners had left since, sickly as they were, in order to crop out a living somewhere else. These couple of thousand people left though, well, these were the ones who did worst in school and best in the mine. They were the hardest working miners, but also happened to be semi-literate, who knew that no one would hire them with their lack of education and lack of really any other skills. They knew how to work the mine. They had done it well and done it hard, but they knew nothing else. They still don't know much else to this day. They're lost. They're so lost. At least middle-aged men who used to be miners, who are still dragging their cancers with them, the ones who still haven't died, at least these know how to work the mine, even though there's no more mining now. But their sons and daughters, the folks in their 20s, the young ones who were raised after the mine was closed in 2002, well, they don't even know that much. There's no life for them anywhere else. This is their home. They know how to drink cheap, toxic alcohol and know how to spit sunflower seed shells, she sighed. So she was there to clean up their mess and to try to bring organization that would teach them at least some other skills. She continued. So you're more than welcome to go talk to them and to interview them about the rich local folklore, she said, for the first time during her monologue, showing a trace of sarcasm. Also, I really, really don't recommend going inside that abandoned mine. I know what you're thinking though, the adventure of going in. I can't stop you though. Look around. There's no police enforcement here. You can do what you want. But we're trying to seal that damn thing tightly. If you go in there, you're going in with a very high risk of radiation exposure. The government of Romania officially says that they closed down the mine in 2002 because there was no uranium left. Well, if that's true, then you should be fine going in, but a lot of these locals have been swearing up and down that there's still some uranium left. If you do go inside, please go in with protective gear. Please, this is no joke, for your own sakes. If you go in, have the proper gear. You're all adults though, so do what you feel. I can't, and I won't try to stop anyone from doing whatever they wish to do. You're adults. So the 6 friends got the mayor's sarcastic hint and decided to skip interviewing any locals about the folklore in the region. They'd heard enough from this very friendly mayor and had already been apprehensive talking to anyone else living here after they had seen these semi-savages barbecuing that poor horse. They all agreed with Theodore that a modern country like Romania back in 2002, hungry for mineral resources and hungry to grow economically, would not deliberately close down a uranium mine if it still had some uranium left in it. It would make no logical sense, so it followed that the government 20 years ago really must have closed it down because there was no more ore to extract. So the mine should be safe by now. As dumb as my country's government is and has been, I don't think they turned down free uranium. Yeah, the mine must be safe by now. It would be cool to just go in and film a few scenes in an abandoned uranium mine. Uranium mine, can you believe it? Who does that? Who does that? We'd be pioneers in this field, and Adrian would be so proud of us, Theodore said excitedly. This will be a great movie. So they all decided to be on the safe side though, and they all drove to Oradea later that evening. It was the closest large city to the area where they would find at least some minimal protective gear to purchase. The salesperson at the store in Oradea told them sold them the most expensive and the thickest protective suits he had, but he admitted that he didn't believe they were built strong enough to withstand uranium radiation in a uranium mine. Sure, it would slow down some, he explained, but he wouldn't go inside any uranium mine himself dressed like that. Now, if it's Nucet's uranium mine you are talking about, the salesperson said in kind of broken English, then you will probably be okay, since mine has been depleted of uranium 20 years ago in past. So the next day they drove back to Nucet, looked at the old map that they had found in Oradea, and thanks to it they located the dirt road that led from the town to the mine. It was only a couple of miles outside of town. Theodore parked his large van outside the opening of the mine, and everybody walked in with flashlights in hand. Theodore was clumsily holding the large camera with both hands. On and on they walked, following the narrow, rusty rails for the little carts that had been used for loading the precious ore. They must have walked about a mile through that tunnel when they finally reached what looked like the main gallery. There, equally rusty small loading carts laid abandoned on the rails in the middle of the gallery, where the rails made a much larger circle for the carts to turn. Theodore filmed his friends for a while. It looked like a normal coal mine, with all the walls getting taller and taller and taller the higher you looked, and forming a dome above their heads. Rock and coal, Carl stated simply. That's how an abandoned uranium looks like then. Okay, nothing out of the ordinary. So they walked to the small loading carts, and Carl jumped inside one of them, the one closer to the entrance into the tunnel, for a quick photo op. Jenna followed suit and jumped into the one all the way in the back. She didn't fit in completely though, because this one was not empty, unlike Carl's. They left some waste inside this one, she announced to the group, and picked up a lump of cold-like material and threw it at Theodore. "Babe, catch!" she said coyly, as she sprightly jumped out of the little wagon. He did catch it with his left hand and held it in front of the camera to film it, and jokingly yelled, "Ooh, wow, check this out, uranium, ooh, I'm afraid." "Yep, uranium, really, so drop it. I can see shiny green spots on it from here," Benedict replied from a few steps away, in his typical matter-of-fact, unexcited way. "I really think that is uranium, or traces of it, so we should probably get out of here." Once they're outside of the mine, they all dumped their suits on the ground and left them at the entrance of the tunnel, since there was no trash can in the area. At the least, better not get any of this potentially radioactive dust in the van, they all thought. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever done in my whole life," Benedict shouted a few minutes later from the back of the van as they were rolling out of Nuchet. He finally spoke in an excited voice for the first time in a very long while. "I can't believe we were all that stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid." "Chill out, man. We wore a lot of protection. If anyone should be affected, I'm the one. I'm the one who held on to that damn thing for the longest," Theodore offered. "We'll be fine. We all had big, thick suits on and wore thick gloves and masks. We'll be fine. I'm not worried." Back at the hotel in Oradea, Theodore threw up several times that night. Jenna was naturally worried. How much food can a person puke? How much is in one's stomach? Good grief. A couple of hours into his throwing up, his teeth and bones started aching badly all over, and his head was hurting like never before. He had a pretty good idea by now that it wasn't food poisoning, but rather the radiation from the uranium that he played with in the mine. Out of consideration for her, he left their bed and tried sleeping it off in one of the two chairs in the hotel room, dragging it as far away from her as possible, just in case. He didn't want her to get any exposure from his radiation, if such a thing was possible. 2 years before, he had watched some show on TV called Chernobyl, in which they portrayed radiation being able to spread from one person to the other by mere touch or by proximity. He wasn't sure how much of that was bogus, just for the shock value of the TV show, but better try to be safe, keep her safe. He loved Jenna. Friends, thank you all so much for putting up with me, for staying through my reading. This was a little excerpt from my book, I Fought the Devil and the Devil Won. It's a book about the origin of vampires 2,000 years ago. It brings it into a modern perspective. It's a book of a lot of twists. I love twists in my books. And I am going to read and post a couple more excerpts like this. This was the first one in a series of 3. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. The book is not available in stores yet. I just did a soft publishing without an ISBN number. I'm waiting for a little bit more input and maybe some reviews. Once I get those, I will publish it. It'll be available at Barnes & Nobles and other places. But for now, I have a few copies, and if anyone is interested, I'm ready to mail it to you. I'll mail it for free. I just want you to enjoy it. Anyway, thanks again so much for watching. This is Bobby, and proud for my new book that I just published, Fought the Devil and the Devil Won. Signing off in New Orleans, Louisiana, September 2022. Thanks.